Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents William Walker's Wars, How One Man's Private American Army Tried to Conquer Mexico, Nicaragua, and Honduras, by Scott Martelle, narrated by David Colacci. Prologue. Trujillo, Honduras, August 21st, 1860. Within the stone walls of the 300-year-old Fortaleza de Santa Barbara, dozens of men, some wearing rags and blood-soaked bandages, worked quietly in soft lamplight, their faces glistening with sweat from stress, humidity, and fever. They struggled to bend the barrels on rifles, drive spikes into the touch-holes of cannons, and drench surplus gunpowder with water. Anything to ensure that the weapons they'd leave behind would be worthless to whichever enemy took over, the Honduran soldiers just beyond rifle range, or British Marines from the HMS Icarus at anchor nearby in the warm Caribbean waters. Not all of the men were fit enough to flee, though. Bullet wounds immobilized 3 of them, and illness incapacitated 3 others, including a New York Herald journalist sent to write about the adventurers. A surgeon and an aide would likewise remain behind to oversee their care in a makeshift hospital ward created by stringing hammocks across a large room. Each of them was given a gun and a small reserve of ammunition in case they needed to defend themselves against an attack, but their plan was to beg mercy from whoever arrived first. As the weapon wreckers worked, William Walker, a short slip of a man with light blond hair and eerily expressionless gray eyes, moved along the hammocks to offer thanks and final words of encouragement to the sick and the wounded. Even though they were Walker's men, his soldiers really, he barely knew most of them. But one, Colonel Thomas Henry, had been a close confidant and strategic adviser, and Walker spent a few extra minutes with him, speaking softly into his ear above the gaping, maggoty wound where his jaw had been shot away. Walker asked whether Henry had uncovered any information that would help them track down José Trinidad Cabañas, the former Honduran president, now waging an insurrection against the current government. Henry, numbed by morphine, scrawled an answer on a piece of paper. Cabañas would be found somewhere along the Rio Negro, now the Rio Seco, about 40 miles east of Trujillo. Walker whispered a few more words, then rushed the visit to an end. The weapons sabotaged and a path forward determined, Walker ordered his remaining men, about 70 of them in various states of health and strength, to gather on the fort's parade grounds. Showing unusual discipline for such a ragtag squadron, the men quietly assembled a little after midnight, then followed Walker through the ancient fort's main gate and over empty streets before disappearing into the jungle. Skulking off in the middle of the night had not been in Walker's plans. He'd left New Orleans nearly 3 months earlier, expecting to take over the small Caribbean island of Roatan, less than 50 miles off Trujillo, at the invitation of English residents who feared for their futures once Great Britain fulfilled a treaty promise and turned the island over to Honduras. But Walker's infamy preceded him. After learning he was in the area, the British delayed the handover, leaving the Union Jack fluttering high above the island's main settlement, Coxon Hole. Walker neither wanted nor could win a battle against British warships, so he decided instead to seize Trujillo and from there invade Nicaragua, his ultimate target all along. But that plan ran into trouble, too, with the arrival of the Icarus and a demand from its captain that Walker and his men surrender. Instead, they ran. The force traveled lightly, each man bearing a rifle and 120 rounds of ammunition, and a few also carrying sidearms and knives. Paralleling the Caribbean coast, they made their way east through the moonless night and into the next day, a remarkable display of stamina against August's tropical heat and humidity. They passed through hamlets whose residents hid from view and along jungle paths as birds squawked and trilled and small monkeys howled and chattered. Walker stopped them at dusk to establish a camp along the bank of a creek, but shortly after sunrise the men forded the river and marched on. They raided small farms, but found little to eat except beef. When night fell, they again camped, and at daybreak they resumed their flight. By mid-afternoon, Walker felt they had put enough distance between themselves and Trujillo for the men to take a lengthy rest, clean their weapons, and let some of the heat of the day dissipate before trying to walk any farther. As the men relaxed at a spot along a wide creek, gunfire exploded from the underbrush, the lead balls shredding leaves and slamming into the earth, tree trunks, and human flesh. The Americans scattered and dove for protection. Some returned fire at the attacking Honduran soldiers, as others hastily put their weapons back together. Amid the chaos, Walker ordered the men into 2 small companies, then sent them sprinting into the brush in a screaming wave of suicidal bravado and gunfire, panicking the Hondurans into flight. But the battle was costly. They'd spent valuable ammunition, and Walker counted 1 dead and 7 or 8 others wounded. The commander himself was among them. Blood oozed from Walker's creased cheek. The men quickly packed up and moved on, carrying the severely wounded and helping the sick. As they worked their way along the trail, occasional harassing gunshots came from behind, one of which struck a top aide, Major Huff, adding to the list of casualties. They reached a mahogany camp near the coastal town of Limon that Walker was surprised to find abandoned, and soon they were off again. Reaching the Rio Negro, they found a canoe and ferried themselves across to a trading post run by an Englishman named Dickens. There they also discovered what was left of Cabañas's encampment, cold campfires and empty rifle pits. "We are lost," one soldier wrote. The Hondurans were stuck on the other side of the river, but escaping them had left Walker's men exhausted, bleeding, and even sicker and more dispirited. No good would come of pushing them further, so Walker ordered the men to bivouac in Cabañas's rifle pits, which offered a little protection from the occasional pot shots their pursuers fired across the Rio Negro. Walker himself, shivering and sweating with fever, commandeered Dickens's house as his headquarters. "Every once in a while," the same soldier wrote, "one of their bullets hits a man, and we have none to spare. Walker calls the roll. 31, healthy and unwounded, men are left." Looking back, Captain Noel Salmon of the HMS Icarus admitted that he had been too accommodating of Walker. The captain and his crew could see the fort at Trujillo from their ship, and they watched Walker's men as they moved around the walls at sunset. But in the dark of the moonless night the British forces didn't see the men spike the fort's cannons or slip away into the jungle. At sunrise the fort seemed, from the ship, to be as abandoned as the village itself. Salmon deployed men to investigate. They reported back that only the surgeon, his aide, 5 sick and wounded men, and the now dead Colonel Henry remained, and that the rest of the Americans had followed Walker on an overland trek to Nicaragua. "I must confess," Salmon later wrote to his superior, "he fairly gave me the slip." Salmon advised 2 Honduran regiments stationed outside Trujillo to take possession of the fort, but posted sentries to protect the Americans, whom he claimed as prisoners. Norberto Martinez, commanding the Honduran troops in Trujillo, also dispatched a squadron to go after Walker and his men. Salmon used couriers to keep abreast of Walker's movements and those of his pursuers. He anticipated that Walker would head for the Mahogany Works in search for a seaworthy boat, but he still asked Honduran General Mariano Alvarez, who had arrived with 200 soldiers from Olanchito, an interior city about 50 miles southwest of Trujillo, to station men around the fort in case Walker doubled back. Salmon set sail on August 22nd.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?